My name is Neil Dwyer. I teach English here at the College of Southern Maryland. And it's my pleasure to get back face to face. We haven't done it in quite a while, right? And it's also my great good fortune to be introducing two fabulous poets as the first event that we've put live in 2.5 years going on now. So, Lauren Marie Schmidt and Martina Espada. We're going to have some housekeeping issues first, and what I need to tell you is this is not the last reading of this, well, of this term it is, but then in November 9th, keep an eye on the Connections website, and we have a wonderful poet, Doug Anderson, will be reading live, face-to-face, over in Prince Frederick. Right? So if you live over there, it might be more convenient for you to attend that one too. And then in December 6th, we have a college literary magazine. Maybe you've seen it, and you're more than welcome to submit your own original poems and stories, and get published. Okay, if it's an interest you have. We also take photography as well. So the deadline for submitting something to that magazine is October 31st. Just keep that in the back of your mind if that's something you'd like to do. And that's it. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley, who is the president of our chapter of Phi Theta Kappa, and she's going to say a few words, and then I'll be back to introduce Lauren Marie Schmidt.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Ashley Karlowski. I am also one of your SGA presidents here at the Oakland campus, and I am a member of the Phi Theta Kappa Honor Society, which is one of the honor societies recognized here at CSM. My idea for this was today is also the first day of National Hispanic Heritage Month, and I really wanted to collaborate because Marlene's work really expounds on the importance of Hispanic heritage and shows a lot of issues that our Hispanic and Latin immigrants face. I am filling in for Professor Rachel Smith, who is going to initially do the reading of the introductions. She's unfortunately sick, so I will be reading her writing. Thank you so much for being here and being patient with everyone involved. Thank you, Ashley, for taking this on for me. Before each poet reads, we will hear about her and his publications and awards. But beforehand, it is important to introduce some of what their poetry does. Lauren's poetry is a voice for womanhood. It swept me right off my feet and sent chills throughout my body, with just the first poem in her book, Filthy Labors, called In Defense of Poetry. This poem does more than defend poetry. It defends women who are made to believe they are weak and dumb because they are raising children in a homeless shelter, suggesting poetry is a waste of 10 mothers' time. The poem compares poetry to the need for faith, saying these women come to poetry as if praying the rosary. This connection of prayer and poetry is a faith everyone needs, especially those suffering in a homeless shelter for women and children. I also have to mention Lauren's poem, The English Teacher Gets a Lesson in Interference, which also takes place in the Haven House for Women and Children. To begin, it is such a powerful poem that says, as straightforward as I have ever heard, the damn reality of pregnancy, the way too many people see it, the idea that it is always a choice and welcomed and loved and out of love. And if it isn't, shame. But more importantly, this poem tells truth. The reality that asking someone if they have any children, if they got any kids, and the answer is no, does not mean they have not had an abortion. This poem pulls open the blinds and reveals life we all know, but pretend not to see. Thank you, Lauren, for your vision. To introduce Martine's poetry is to start with the word love. I begin with this because his poems rely on it. This will become obvious as you hear him become each poem he reads as his title poem, Floaters, that addresses the horrific reality of our border control's ability to dehumanize people willing to do the unthinkable to save their families, their children. And the dead have names, a feast day parade of names. Names, 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 Martin reminds us, not floaters. This poem carves their names in headlines. This poem gives angels their wings. And then there is the love poem to his wife, Lauren. Love is a luminous insect at the window. In the beginning, love is indestructible as an insect, and it seems the speaker would like to swat it away. But after realizing the impossibility of this, love becomes luminous green wings knocking at the screen on windows as if to say, I only have a week to live, let me in. And he does. Both of these poems, reminders that it is so much easier to love than to hate or fear what we do not know how to handle. Thank you, Martine and Lauren, for your passion and for your love. Enjoy the reading, Rachel. I will be giving it to
Lauren Marie Schmidt is the author of 4 collections of poetry. 2 Black Eyes and a Patch of Hair Missing, The Voodoo Doll Parade, from the Main Street Rag Author's Choice Chapbook series, Psalms of the Dying Room, a sequence of poems about her experience at a soup kitchen in Eugene, Oregon, and Filthy Labors, which chronicles her volunteer teaching experience at a transitional housing program for homeless women in her native New Jersey. Her work has appeared in such journals as the North American Review, Alaska Quarterly Review, Rattle, Nimrod, Painted Bride Quarterly, Hank, New York Quarterly, Bellevue Literary Review, and the Progressive. Her awards include the So to Speak Poetry Prize, the Neil Postman Prize for Poetry, the Janet B. McCabe Prize for Poetry, and the Bellevue Literary Review's Vilsec Prize for Poetry. Schmidt's first novel, called Isra Every Day, will be going out on submission through an agency later this fall. A teacher of English in urban high schools for many years, Schmidt currently teaches humanities at the Academy of Charlemont in Western Massachusetts. Please join me in welcoming Lauren Marie Schmidt.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. How are you? Doing well. Okay, I have to give a shout out to my juniors who are watching right now. It's their lunch period. Hi, juniors. Okay, so I have a few thank yous to make before we get started. I want to thank Wayne Carlin for this invitation to be here this afternoon, Rachel Smith and Neil Dwyer, who took up the reins to organize this, and there were a lot of moving parts to that, so I really appreciate that. Krista Keys, who picked us up from the airport, and Ashley, who just gave her first public speech with more people in the room than she ever has before. Let's give her a round of applause. I'm going to start with a poem that's dedicated to my husband, Martin Espada. If you didn't know that, he and I are married. This is based on one of the earliest dates that we ever took in New Jersey to Camden to see Whitman's birthplace. I don't know if you know anything about Camden, New Jersey, but it is historically a very impoverished, it's one of the most crime-ridden communities in all of New Jersey. And this is what his idea of romance is, taking me to Camden, New Jersey. It begins with an epigraph by Whitman, and it says, Camden was originally an accident, but I shall never be sorry I was left over in Camden. It has brought me blessed returns. What would Whitman think of what used to be Mickle Street, where stoops and sidewalks erupt with the roots of trees, where parking meters leaning in a slate-gray sky wait, their mouths open for dirty change, where buildings seared with spray paint slouch in the city heat, where storefront windows are patched with planks of wood, where letters of street signs have slipped off, where stoplights don't blink, where street lamps are busted out. What would he think of the cardboard clock pressing its face against a window to his home, a timepiece with plastic hands? Next tour, 1 o'clock, the red hands say. What would Whitman think of his death notice, now framed, that hung on the front door, never having seen it himself? What would he think of you and me, the future readers he wrote for, or the tour guide who wanted only to return to his turkey sandwich? Did Whitman know you would point to the title page of the first edition of Leaves, where the poet's name strangely is missing? What would he think of John Giannotti's gargantuan statue, the falsely reverent pose, the vest, the cane, the butterfly perched on the bronze finger? Would the poet really approve of standing outside a Rutgers campus Starbucks? What would Whitman think of the prison across the street from where he died on the other side of the boulevard, named today for Martin Luther King? What would he think of the chained fences, how they wear wreaths of barbed wire? What would he think of the dusty field in the back where men once stuffed their feet while walking aimlessly in the dirt, or scratched their names with the toes of their shoes? What would Whitman think of Haddon Avenue, the long stretch south to where he rests, the buildings pocked with gunshots, gang tags searing every flat surface, or the flags that hung like a death notice for the city's doors from the top of every streetlight? Tomorrow is a new day, the red flags say. What would Whitman think of Camden, a city that has forgotten him, a city where the only haven from death along Haddon Avenue is Harley Cemetery? What would he think of the rain that fell on my umbrella, rapping like gunfire? What would he think of you, jokingly quoting his line about boot soles when I slip on slick roots snake-like and wild as the poet's own beard? What would Whitman think of the padlock that sags from the thick chain wound around the spires of the iron gates, the door he wanted open so his soul could roam free? What would he think of the trees that bow their heads to kiss his triangular tomb, or the poets and dreamers who come to carve their names in the guts of the trunks the way a prisoner scars the walls of his cell? I was here, those names say. Let me be remembered. This was not planned, but incidentally, I'm going to be reading the 2 poems that were mentioned in the introduction that Ashley read. And the first is the first poem in the collection called In Defense of Poetry. When I started this volunteer work, a lot of people were sort of surprised and saying, well, you're a trained teacher. Why on earth are you teaching them poetry? Why not something like what you would teach in an English class? And this was my defense. This was my response to them. In defense of poetry. To you who say poetry is a waste of 10 homeless mothers' time, that I should correct their grammar and spelling, spit-shine their speech so it gleams, to make them sound more like me, that I should set a bucket of yes, miss, thank you, whatever you say, miss, on their heads, fill that bucket heavy, tell them how to tiptoe to keep it steady, that I should give them something they can truly use, like diapers, food, or boots. I say, you've never seen these women lower their noses over poetry, as if praying the rosary, as if hoping for a lover to slip his tongue between their lips, or sip a thin spring of water from a fountain. This is another shorty, and it's called The English Teacher Gets a Lesson in Inference. On the first day that I started there, I wanted the women to know that this was not like a teacher-student space. And I thought the only way that I could make them feel comfortable is to let them know who they were dealing with, like who is this person in front of me. And so I asked them to ask me any questions that they wanted to know. And so this poem is based on the first question that I got on the first day of volunteering at this place. The English teacher gets a lesson in inference. "You got any kids?" Deanna asks. "No," I say. "I don't have any kids." "You ever been pregnant?" "I don't have any kids, so that ain't the question that I asked you," she says. Then she folds her arms across her chest and waits for me to answer. So what I'm calling the Haven House for Homeless Women and Children is not the real name, but it was located in Monmouth County. It is now a defunct organization, unfortunately. Also in Monmouth County is a place called Two River Theater, which is a local theater company and playhouse. And in recent years, they have been doing the August Wilson's Pittsburgh cycle, and starting to see them on a regular basis, which has been great. And I was able to procure, by way of elbowing and bullying, 11 free tickets for the women at the Haven House and me. I accompanied them. And this is, for many of them, it was their first time that they ever got to see a play. And this was how they were greeted there. This also begins with an epigraph from August Wilson's Two Trains Running. And it's from one of the main characters named Memphis. "You born free. It's up to you to maintain it. You born with dignity and everything else. Freedom is heavy. You gotta put your shoulder to freedom. Put your shoulder to it and hope your back hold up." August Wilson, Two Trains Running, Act 1, Scene 2. Hands grip painted rails as bodies and bodies climb shallow stairs, file into aisle, thin out into row after row after row, like insects swarming a velvet maze. The mothers pinch their tickets, show them to the usher as if showing a license at the liquor store, proof of their belonging there. The late 60s fixed as if behind museum glass. A diner in Pittsburgh's Hills District stands still on stage. A counter, stools, tables, and chairs, a payphone, 2 booths, and a blackboard chalked with the menu. We find our seats, 11 women split between 2 rows, 5 in J, 6 in K, the bunch of us divided but clumped together. The mothers in back tug on our hair, tickle our ears, pull the necklines of our sweaters. They snap selfies with their cell phones, seats set and stage captured in the background, and make megaphones and telescopes with their playbills. The house lights so silver bright, the room feels almost holy. Then a man with a wristwatch and white hair stuffed in the conch shells of his ears pushes down the seat next to me and eases himself into the zigzag patterned plushness, his knees falling open. At intermission, this man will fling his playbill on the floor, hustle his wife out and huff, "I can't understand the way these people talk. I don't even know what they're saying." His exit will come as no surprise, because when he first sat down, he looked at the women, then looked at me, then looked at the women and looked at me, and seeing only dissimilarity, with a smile he inquired, "Did you bring these girls here on a field trip?" I hardened. "No, just a ladies' day at the playhouse," I said. I felt our 2 rows wilt, then the house lights blacked out. So a lot of what I hoped to accomplish in writing this book is looking at those really intense moments where these women are made to feel that they don't belong or that they're not good enough. And that was certainly one of them. It was an awful moment, because what's really interesting about this is that I was about the same age as most of the women that I was serving at the time. So I was a few years older than them, but I was in my early 30s and they were in their mid to late 20s, right? And just because I'm a white lady, they assume that I'm the teacher. And it was just sort of an awful way to begin what was a really magical time before them seeing their first play. However, there are a series of poems in here, and the next one is an example of that, where we see the women asserting their own dignity in the face of constant indignity, even in an organization that was meant to assist and support them. This next poem is called Cloistered. There are no men in the Haven House, and whether it was the tides and the moon, or the nearness of their rooms, 10 red rosaries aligned, and the animal throb of their bodies too hard for two mothers to deny. So when I say, write a poem about a body you know, bodies of their sons, their daughters, their mothers, their own. Shauna writes of the night she made her way into a bedroom down the hall and reads aloud her poem about the dark vinegar of another woman's menstruation on her mouth, the tang of that first forbidden taste. She reads about how the scent of red-brown silt streaked her nose, chin, and cheeks, how her fingernails carried crescents of blood for 3 days before the smell they held was fully scrubbed away, how she'd lift her fingers to her nose and inhale, teasing her secret lover in the hallways and over dinner. But here she is now, the door to her confessional wide open. All other mothers but one are scared. Of what, it is not clear. The blood, the body, 2 bloods, 2 bodies, sex at all in a place where you can't even snack in the living room. Sex because sex put them here in the first place. Though not this sex, hidden sex, between 2 women sex, at that time of the month sex, with the nighttime aid just downstairs sex, there are no men in the Haven House sex. So 2 women turned to each other, bowed to the cross of the other woman's body, and drank deeply of her consecrated wine. I'm going to close my reading with another interaction with one of the social workers there who didn't like me. She didn't like me. I don't know why. She insisted that there was a lot of tension between the mothers and the staff and that it increased when I came. I would say it is poetry that did that, not me. But maybe there's something about writing your own story and telling your own story and the power that that affords us and the dignity that allows us to speak our truth. But she insisted that I was a troublemaker. And this poem, the final poem I'm going to read, is based on what was one of our last interactions that we had. The social worker's advice. These are direct quotes, by the way. Jabbing a finger in my face, you say, you can't have empathy. Empathy will eat you alive. As if empathy were a beast with feathers, fur, and hair, with hind legs and deft feet, wings and claws, a beast that soars, stalks, lunges, springs, a beast that chases, a beast that screams instead of sings, with giant jaws and a tongue budded with a rapacious taste for fools like me, fools who don't believe a beast exists to eat, who let it burrow its snout between our legs, fingers up to our armpits, the spaces of our common human stink. But you see a beast that sniffs and snarls for a thick blue vein to sick, and when I look at you, I understand the beast more plainly. I see that its skin collects pockmarks each time you dock merit points to teach the mothers not to talk black. I see that its forehead sprouts 1,000 of your scornful eyes, its claws slash as swift and deep as your condescension. Because what you mean is that I can't have empathy for these girls, for these times, for a place like this. For Nicole, who tallies the number of days it's been since she last flushed her veins with a spoon-cooked mix. 28 days and counting. No empathy for Nicole because she can never seem to find matching socks for her 4-year-old son, or because she folds flowers from twice-used computer paper to calm her nerves. Bouquets of paper daisies sprout from vases on all 4 tables in the dining room. What you mean is that I can't have empathy for Takina, who was told to go by Tina because her white adoptive mother, middle-aged, middle-class, prefers it. Her birth mother is 5 years gone, and Takina thinks she might be pregnant again. I can't have empathy for Denise, who who was pregnant with her third but didn't know until she was too far in, for Angelica, who fell down the stairs while holding her infant son, too spent from pre-sun feedings and weeping in the wee hours as minutes lurched by. Each tick-tock is the sound of the deadlocked door of the nighttime aide, who snores in the small room near the exit like a beast at the gates, preventing escape from this place, this time, from lives like these, without signing a release form for the Division of Youth and Family Services, like Diana, who took her 2 kids to a hotel where alone at night she stares at ceiling holes in the red glow of the word vacancy, flashing through windows with no curtains. I can't have empathy for Lakita, so thin that when she aims her breast at her baby's lips, she prays she has something wet and real to give. When you say with your wagging finger, you can't have empathy, empathy will eat you alive. What you mean is that I can't have empathy for these girls. And when I look at you, I cannot help but wonder when you first believed empathy would do more than sniff and lick your palms. So, I say, let it take me then, this beast of your invention. Let it slip its fangs into my skin and tear through my throat. Let it suck all the fat and blood from off my solid bones. Thank you.
Thank you. Martina Espada. I first met him when I was an undergrad at a college in Virginia. And it's been my pleasure to welcome Martina back to the College of Southern Maryland. Martina Espada has published more than 20 books as poet, editor, essayist, and translator. His latest book of poems is called Floaters, winner of the 2021 National Book Award, and a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. Other books of poems include Vivas to Those Who Have Failed, The Trouble Ball, The Republic of Poetry, Alabanza, and Imagine the Angels of Bread. He is the editor of What Saves Us, Poems of Empathy and Outrage in the Age of Trump. He has received the Ruth Lilly Prize, Poetry Prize, the Shelley Memorial Award, the Robert Creeley Award, an Academy of American Poets Fellowship, the Penn Revson Fellowship, the Lettres Boris Fellowship, and a Guggenheim Fellowship. The Republic of Poetry was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. The title poem of his collection, Alabanza, about 9/11, has been widely anthologized and performed. His book of essays and poems, Zapata's Disciple, was banned in Tucson as part of the Mexican-American Studies program, outlawed by the state of Arizona. A former tenant lawyer in Greater Boston, Espada is a professor of English at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Please join me in welcoming Martina Espada.
Buenas tardes. That was better. Okay, good afternoon. Welcome everyone here, welcome everyone there. Very glad to be back at the College of Southern Maryland. First of all, I want to begin by acknowledging the reading you just heard. That was great. There are many people to thank. Lauren has thanked them. I will thank them again. my old and dear friend Wayne Carlin out there in Zoomland. Rachel Smith also in Zoomland. Krista Keys in Zoomland. Neil Dwyer, who's here. Ashley Karwoski, who's here. And I'd like to acknowledge our friends, Lee and Lisa, who drove all the way from Lancaster, Pennsylvania to be here. All right? That's what we're going to do. Before I get started, a bit of housekeeping or timekeeping myself. How much time do we have here? How are we fixed for time?
We have as much as you want.
As much as, oh, maybe I'll read my Spanish translation of what we did. Is there a time when the class has to leave?
Yes. Yes.
When?
1:25.
1:25. He's writing it down. Okay. I think we can work something out. All right. So, I see many of you have the book. That's good. You can follow along. And I will give you page numbers as we go. This is the book, Floaters. I will be reading mostly from this book. One poem not in the book is a special request. The first poem I want to read is the first poem in the book. It's called Jumping Off the Mystic Tobin Bridge, and it is on page 3 of your hymnal. So, let me give you a little bit of background on this poem. I am not only a poet, but a lawyer. Yes. In fact, 30 years ago, I was a tenant lawyer with a program called Su Clínica Legal. Su Clínica Legal was a legal services program for low-income Spanish-speaking tenants in a place called Chelsea, Massachusetts. Now, Chelsea is a tough little town right across the Tobin Bridge from Boston. It's a gateway city. It's a city of immigrants. It always has been. In those days, they were coming from the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic. They were coming from Central America, El Salvador, Guatemala. In fact, we even had clients from Southeast Asia. So the first half of the poem is about that and an encounter I had with a racist cab driver stuck on the bridge between Boston and Chelsea. The second half of the poem is about the most notorious murder case in the history of Boston, the Chuck Stewart murder case. This was a case where a white man killed his wife, blamed it on an imaginary African-American carjacker. And because this was Boston, he almost got away with it. Almost. So we begin here with jumping off the Mystic Tobin Bridge. I close my eyes and see him windmilling his arms as he plummets from the Mystic Tobin Bridge to prove me wrong, to show me he was good, to atone for sins like seeds on the lopsided apple of his heart, but mostly to escape from me in the back of his cab, a Puerto Rican lawyer in a suit and tie. I hated the 111 bus, sweltering in my suit and tie with the crowd in the aisle, waiting to hit a bump on the Mystic Tobin Bridge so my head would finally burst through the ceiling like a giraffe on a circus train. I hated the 111 bus after eviction day at Chelsea District Court, translating the landlords and judges into Spanish so the tenants knew they had to stuff their clothing into garbage bags and steal away again. Away from the 40-watt squint that followed them everywhere, that followed me because I stood beside them in court. I would daydream in the humidity of the bus, a basketball hero, flipping the balled up pages of the law into the wastebasket at the office as the legal aid lawyers chanted my name. I hated the 111 bus. I had to take a taxi cab that day. What the hell are you doing here? said the driver of the cab to me in my suit and tie. "You gotta be careful in this neighborhood. There's a lot of Jose's around here." The driver's great-grandfather staggered off a boat to his great-grandson could one day drive me across the mystic Tobin Bridge, but there was no room in the taxi but chalk and a blackboard. He could hear the song of my breath as I leaned into his ear, past a bulletproof barricade somehow missing, and said, "I'm Jose." I could see the 40-watt squint in his rearview mirror. "I'm Puerto Rican," I said. It was exactly 5 p.m., and we were stuck in traffic in a taxi on the Mystic Tobin Bridge. The driver stammered his own West Side story without the ballet. How a Puerto Rican gang stole his cousin's wallet years ago. "You think I'm gonna rob you?" I said, in my suit and tie, close enough now to tickle his ear with the mouth of a revolver. I could hear the sawing of his breath. He still wanted to know what I was doing there. "I'm a lawyer. I go to court with all the Jose's," I said. Stalled traffic steamed around us, the breath of cattle in the winter air. Where you going for the holidays?" the driver said. I thought about Christmas Eve in court, eviction orders flying from the judge's bench when tenants without legal aid lawyers or children old enough to translate the English of the summons did not answer to their names. Every year, the legal aid lawyers told a joke about the Christmas defense. "Your Honor, it's Christmas." I said to the driver, "I will be spending Christmas right here with my fellow Jose's." The driver shouted, "What do you want me to do? Get out of this cab and jump off the bridge?" We both knew what he meant. We both knew about Chuck Stewart, the last man to jump off the Mystic Tobin Bridge. Everybody knew how Chuck drove his wife to Mission Hill after birthing classes, the flash and pop in the dark when he shot her in the head and himself in the belly. Everybody knew how he conjured a black carjacker on the crackling call to 911, the way the Mercury Theater on the Air conjured Martians in New Jersey on the radio half a century before. Everybody knew how 100 cops pounded on door after door in the projects of Mission Hill, locking a black man in a cage for the world to see like the last of his tribe on exhibit at the World's Fair. Everybody knew how Chuck would have escaped, cashing the insurance check to drive away with a new Nissan, but for his brother's confession, the accomplice throwing the Gucci bag with makeup, the wedding rings, and the gun off the dizzy bridge in Revere. Everybody knew how Chuck parked his new car on the lower deck, left a note, and launched himself deep into the black water, how the cops hauled his body from the river by lunchtime when I walked into the office to tell the secretary Chuck Stewart just jumped off the Mystic Tobin Bridge. I said nothing to the driver. I almost nodded yes in the rearview mirror. I confess, for a flash, I wanted him to jump. The driver, the cops, the landlords, the judges, all wanted us to jump off the Mystic Tobin Bridge. All wanted us to sprout gills like moving monsters so we could paddle underwater back to the islands, down into the weeds and mud at the bottom, past the fish-plucked rib cages of the dead, the rusty revolvers of 1,000 crimes unsolved, the wedding rings of marriages gone bad, till we washed up on shore in a tangle of seaweed, gasping for air. Last night, still more landed here. Clothing stuffed in garbage bags, to flee the god of hurricanes, flinging their houses into the sky, or the god of hunger slipping his knife between their ribs. Not a dark tide like the tide of the Mystic River, but builders of bridges. You can walk across the bridges they build, or you can jump. So, this next poem is on page 6. It's the title poem of the book, Floaters. What's that all about? Well, it began with a viral photograph. A photograph everybody saw. A photograph of 2 Salvadoran migrants, father and daughter, who came to be known by their first names, who came to be known as Oscar and Valeria. They drowned crossing the Rio Grande, crossing the big river in June of 2019. This tragedy triggered outrage, it triggered grief, and it triggered what we now call trutherism. There was a post in the I'm 1015 Border Patrol Facebook group charging that this photograph that broke hearts around the world was actually a fake, doctored, made up. And so the poem I wrote, the poem I'm about to read, is a response to the photograph, but also a response to these charges, these heartless charges. The word floaters, by the way, is a Border Patrol term for those who have drowned crossing over, making that dangerous passage to come to this country. And we know this is still going on. There's an Oscar and Valeria drowning every day. So, the poem starts with an epigraph quotation from the I'm 1015 Border Patrol Facebook group and goes from there. Floaters. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and ask. Have y'all ever seen floaters this clean? I'm not trying to be an ass, but I have never seen floaters like this. Could this be another edited photo? We've all seen the Dems and liberal parties do some pretty sick things. Anonymous post, I'm 1015, Border Patrol Facebook group. Like a beer bottle thrown into the river by a boy too drunk to cry. Like the shard of a styrofoam cup drained of coffee, brown as the river. Like the plank of a fishing boat broken in half by the river, the dead float, and the dead have a name. Floaters, say the men of the Border Patrol, keeping watch all night by the river, hearts pumping coffee as they say the word floaters, soft as a bubble, hard as a shoe, as it nudges the body to see if it breathes, to see if it moans, to see if it sits up and speaks. And the dead have names, a feast day parade of names, names that dress all in red, names that twirl skirts, names that blow whistles, names that shake rattles, names that sing in praise of the saints. Say, Oscar Alberto Martinez Ramirez. Say, Angie Valeria Martinez Avalos. See how they rise off the tongue, the calling of bird to bird somewhere in the trees above our heads, trilling in the dark heart of the leaves. Say what we know of them now they are dead. Oscar slapped dough for pizza with oven-blistered fingers. Daughter Valeria sang, banging a toy guitar. He slipped free of the apron he wore in the blast of the oven, sold the motorcycle he would kick till it sputtered to life, counted off pesos for the journey across the river, and the last of his 25 years, and the last of her 23 months. There is another name that beats its wings in the heart of the trees. Say, Tanya Vanessa Avalos, Oscar's wife and Valeria's mother, the witness, stumbling along the river. Now their names rise off her tongue. Say, Oscar y Valeria. He swam from Matamoros across to Brownsville. The girl slung around his neck, stood her in the weeds on the Texas side of the river, swore to return with her mother in hand, turning his back as fathers do, who later say, I turned around and she was gone. In the time it takes for a bird to hop from branch to branch, Valeria jumped in the river after her father. Maybe he called out her name as he swept her up from the river. Maybe the river drowned out his voice as the water swept them away. Tanya called out the names of the saints, but the saints drowsed in the stupor of birds in the dark, their cages covered with blankets. The men on patrol would never hear their pleas for asylum, watching for floaters, hearts pumping coffee all night on the Texas side of the river. No one, they say, had ever seen floaters this clean. Oscar's black shirt yanked up to the armpits, Valeria's arms slung around her father's neck. Even after the light left her eyes, both face down in the weeds back on the Mexican side of the river. Another edited photo. See how her head disappears in his shirt, the waterlogged diaper bunched in her pants, the blue of the blue cans. The radio warned us about the crisis actors we see at one school shooting after another. The man called. Oscar will breathe, sit up, speak, tug the black shirt over his head, shower off the mud, and shake hands with the photographer. Yet, the floaters did not float down the Rio Grande like Olympians showing off the backstroke, nor did the souls float up to Dallas, land of rumored jobs and a president shot in the head as he waved from his motorcade. No bubbles rose from their breath in the mud, light as the iridescent circles of soap that would fascinate a 2-year-old. And the dead still had names. Names that sing in praise of the saints. Names that flower in blossoms of white. A cortege of names dressed all in black, trailing the coffins to the cemetery. Carve their names in headlines of gravestones they would never know in the kitchens of this cacophonous world. Enter their names in the book of names. Say, Oscar Alberto Martinez Ramirez. Say, Angie Valeria Martinez Avalos. Bury them in a corner of the cemetery named for the sainted Archbishop of the poor, shot in the heart saying Mass. Bullets bought by the taxes I paid when I worked as a bouncer and fractured my hand 40 years ago, and bumper stickers read, El Salvador is Spanish for Vietnam. When the last bubble of breath escapes the body, may the men who speak of floaters who have never seen floaters this clean float through the clouds to the heavens, where they paddle the air as they wait for the saint who flips the keys on his ring like a drowsy janitor till he fingers the key that turns the lock and shuts the gate on their babble-tongued faces, and they plunge back to earth, a shower of hailstones pelting the river, the Mexican side of the river. Thank you. I do believe that times of hate call for poems of love. So there's a series of love poems in this book. Starting on page 33 with a poem called Oh Bod with Concussion. What? Yes. You already met Lauren, poet, novelist, teacher, most importantly, the love of my life. She taught for many years in urban education from Paterson, New Jersey to Springfield, Massachusetts. She would leave in the dark, she would come home in the dark. And that is the setting for this next poem. Now, I should say that an aubade is a French first form and has to do with a party of lovers at dawn. Anybody can write one. This is mine. Aubade with concussion, epigraph, poverty is black ice, Naomi Agenda. You leave me sleeping in the dark. You kiss me, and I stir, fingers in your hair, eyes open, unseeing. You leave me asleep every morning, commuting to the school in the city at sunrise. The landlord's driveway, a muddy creek, ices over hard after the freezing rain clatters all night. Your feet fly up, your head slamming the ground, an eclipse of the sun flooding your eyes. You sleep under the car. No one knows how long you sleep. You awake with 100 ice picks stabbing your eardrums. You awake, coat and hair soaked, and somehow drive to school. You remember to turn left at the Smith & Wesson factory. The other teachers lead you by the elbow to Mercy Hospital, where you pause when the nurse asks your name, where you claim your pain level is a 4, and they slide you into the white coffin of an MRI machine. You hold your breath. They film your brain. Concussion. The word we use for the boxer plunging face first to the canvas after the uppercut blindsided him, not the teacher commuting to school at sunrise in a Subaru Crosstrek. Yet, you would drive. Ears hammering as they hammer in the purgatory of the MRI. A week before, Isabella came to you in the classroom and said, "Miss, I cannot sleep. 3 days, I cannot sleep." Her boyfriend called at 2 a.m. and she did not pick up. At 3 a.m., a single shot to the head put him to sleep. And he will sleep forever, his body hidden beneath a car in a parking lot on Maple Street. The cops, the television cameras, the neighbors all gathering at the yellow tape carnival of his corpse. You said to Isabella, "Take this journal, write it down. You don't have to show me. You don't have to show anyone." On the cover of the journal you bought at the drugstore was the word dream. Isabella sat there in your classroom at your desk, pencil waving in furious circles. By lunchtime, as her friends slapped each other, Isabella slept, head on the desk, face pressed against the pages of the journal. This is why I watch you sleep at 3 a.m. when the sleeping pills fail to quell the strike beating in my brain. This is why I say to you when you kiss me in my sleep, "Don't go. Don't go. You have to go." So, some of you, if you are writing poetry, even if you aren't, probably wonder, how do you make a poem? What's the process? We get that question all the time. Well, I'm going to tell you. This next poem is actually not in your book, so you'll just have to listen. came about as a result of a prompt. Lauren is the best teacher I've ever seen. You should all have her once. Right? And we had a running joke between us. I used to say, one day you're going to be carrying around my head in a jar. That's it. That's all going to be left of me is a head in a jar. You're going to be carrying it around. You're going to be embarrassed. She said, no, I'm not. And so we started to talk about it. What if I wrote a poem? What would this poem look like? She started giving me the details. She started giving me a prompt. It has to have this in it, it has to have that in it, it has to do this, you have to do that, this thing should look like this. Next thing you know, I am taking this assignment and writing a poem. So this poem is weird. This poem is strange. This poem is a bit upsetting. But here it is. This is the prompt I got from my wife to write her a love poem. So I hope you're all paying attention because you can all do this on Valentine's Day. Love song of the disembodied head in a jar. Like the pirates and revolutionaries of legend, heads spiked atop the great bridge spanning the great city. I am now a head without a body. Maybe the body ran away while I was sleeping, slamming headless into walls and doors. Maybe my body flew away, flapping arms, liberated until a zap of telephone wires. You love me even if I have nothing but a disembodied head in a jar. You take me everywhere, buying an extra ticket to the movies and propping the jar on your lap so I can see the screen. Hauling me to our favorite pizza joint on the boardwalk for 2 slices on a paper plate, though I can no longer chew or swallow. You yell at anyone who stares too long at my head, rotating slowly in the superformaldehyde, and defiantly smooch the jar in their presence. We hustle dollars at the county fair. The crowds are pressed close to shriek when I blink at them, to gape astonished when I sing, I'm forever blowing bubbles. The bubbles rising from my nose and mouth, my hair swaying like seaweed. You take care of me. You dump beard shampoo into my jar as if you were feeding fish. You read to me from bad novels and we snicker together. You leave me on your night table so my floating face is all you see when your alarm goes off to wake you in the morning. Good morning, my love, you say. But how can you love me? I am a disembodied head in a jar, I cry. And my tears disappear in the soupy liquid where I live. You are always patient when I ask. You explain, as if talking to a Pomeranian, that you loved me when my body was so wide I would snap wooden chairs in half by leaning back. You loved me when my body was so lean my skin would hang like wax dripping from a tall candle. You loved me when my body was so broad 2 satchels dangled from the rack of my shoulders as I bounded up the stairs of the train station to see you. You loved me when my body was so spindly the sheets in the hospital mummified me as if fresh from the sarcophagus. Now you love me when my head swims laps all day. And you kiss my lips pressed up against the glass with a loud smack. Today, my head sits in a jar atop the piano in the dining room, where the poets eating arroz con pollo at our table can toast me with their wine, where the washing machine repairman can tell us he had a cousin like that, where I can warble my love song of the disembodied head for you. I'm forever blowing bubbles. The only song I can remember is you playing along on the piano, and my head turns slowly to the music. You like that, huh? Okay. So, my luck wasn't always that good, especially in high school. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, and then my parents had the brilliant idea to move us all to Long Island. I was the only Puerto Rican in the neighborhood, and I caught all kinds of hell. And just so you know, you familiar with the word spick? Yeah? Okay. All right. It's a pejorative. It's a bad word for Puerto Ricans. This is called Asking Questions of the Moon. And there's an epigraph from a great Spanish poet. Some blind girls ask questions of the moon, and spirals of weeping rise to the air. Federico Garcia Lorca. As a boy, I stood guard in right field, lazily punching my glove, keeping watch over the ball game and the moon as it rose in the infield, asking questions of the moon about the girl with long blonde hair in the back of my classroom, who sat with me when no one else would, who talked to me when no one else would, who laughed at my jokes when no one else would, until the day her friends sat beside us and whispered to her behind that long hair, and the girl asked me, as softly as she could, "Are you a spec?" And I, with a hive of words in my head, could only think to say, "Yes, I am." She never spoke to me again. And as I thought of her in the outfield, the moon fell from the sky, tore through the webbing of my glove, and smacked me in the eye. Blinded, I wept, kicked the moon at my feet, and loudly blamed the webbing of my glove. Okay, so I'm going to read one more poem. And then if you have to go, you have to go. If you have questions, it'll be time for questions. If you want to get your book signed, you can hang around. We'll be happy to sign your book. Brought a pen. This last poem is on page 59. It's called Letter to My Father. And my father's name was Frank Espada, Francisco Luis Espada. Frank Espada was born in a mountain town called Utuado, Puerto Rico in 1930. He died in Pacifica, California in 2014. When Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico in 2017, I saw his hometown everywhere. It was on the news, it was in the headlines, it was online. John Lee Anderson in the pages of the New Yorker said that Utuado had become a byword for the island's devastation. Let's not forget that 4,000 people died. Well, I started talking to my father's ashes in a box on my bookshelf, and that's where this poem came from. I'll finish with this, and thank you for being here, wherever you are. Letter to my father, October 2017. You once said, "My reward for this life will be 1,000 pounds of dirt shoveled in my face." You were wrong. You were 7 pounds of ashes in a box, a Puerto Rican flag wrapped around you next to a red brick from the house in Utuado where you were born, all crammed together on my bookshelf. You taught me there is no God, no life after this life, so I know you're not watching me type this letter over my shoulder. When I was a boy, you were God. I watched from the 7th floor of the projects as you walked down into the street to stop a public execution. A big man caught a small man stealing his car, and everyone in Brooklyn heard the car alarm wail of the condemned, "He's killing me!" At a word from you, the executioner's hand slipped from the hair of the thief. "The kid was high," was all you said when you came back to us. When I was a boy, and you were God, we flew to Puerto Rico. You said, "My grandfather was the mayor of Utuado. His name was Buenaventura. That means good fortune." I believed in your grandfather's name. I heard the tree frogs chanting to each other all night. I saw a banana leaf, an elephant palm sprouting from the mountain's belly. I gnawed the mango's pit, and the sweet yellow hair stuck between my teeth. I said to you, you came from another planet. How'd you do it? You said, every morning, just before I woke up, I saw the mountains. Every morning, I see the mountains. And while 3 sisters, all in their 70s, all bedridden, all Pentecostales who only left the house for church, lay sleeping on mattresses spread across the floor when the hurricane gutted the mountain the way a butcher slices open a dangled pig, and a rolling wall of mud buried them, leaving the 4th sister to stagger into the street screaming like an unheeded prophet about the end of the world. In Utuado, a man who cultivated a garden of aguacate and carambola, feeding the avocado and star fruit to his nieces from New York, so the trees in his garden beheaded all at once, like the soldiers of a beaten army, and so hanged himself. And Utuado, a welder and a handyman, rigged a pulley with a shopping cart to ferry rice and beans across the river where the bridge collapsed, witnessed the cart swaying above so many hands that raised a sign that told the helicopters, Campamento Los Olvidados, Camp of the Forgotten. Los Olvidados wait 7 hours in line for a government meal of Skittles and Vienna sausage, or a tarp to cover the bones of a house with no roof as the fungus grows on their skin from sleeping on mattresses drenched with the spit of the hurricane. They drink the brown water, waiting for microscopic monsters in their bellies to visit plagues upon them. A nurse says, these people are going to have an epidemic. These people are going to die. The president flips rolls of paper towels to a crowd at a church in Guaynabo, Zeus lobbing thunderbolts on the locked ward of his delusions. Down the block, cousin Ricardo, Bernice's boy, says that somebody stole his can of diesel. I heard somebody ask you once if Puerto Rico needed to be free, and you said, 3 pulgadas de sangre en la calle. 3 inches of blood in the street. Now, 3 inches of mud flow through the streets of Utuado, and troops patrol the town, as if guarding the vein of copper in the ground, as if a shovel digging graves in the backyard might strike the ore below, as if La Brigada, swinging machetes to clear the road, might remember the last uprising. I know you are not God. I have the proof. 7 pounds of ashes in a box on my bookshelf. Gods do not die, and yet I want you to be God again. Stride from the crowd to seize the president's arm before another roll of paper towels sails away. Thunder Spanish obscenities in his face. Banish him to a roofless rainstorm in Utuado, so he unravels one soaked sheet after another till there is nothing left but his cardboard heart. I promised myself I would stop talking to you, white box of gray grit. You were deaf even before you died. Hear my promise now. I will take you to the mountains where houses lost like ships at sea rise blue and yellow from the mud. I will open my hands. I will scatter your ashes. En Utuado. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. Thank you. There's a question right there.
Yes, so, give me like 5 seconds, and I don't really my notes, so. Alright, so, I wanted to ask, like, what company did you go to get your poems, like,
Okay, could you speak up, please?
what place did you go to get your poems published?
You mean now, or when I started, or?
When you first went through the process?
Yeah, I didn't know what I was doing. So, and that's true of everybody when you start out. So I first, all publishing is really local. So if you're a poet especially, so you start looking around and see what's happening where you are. And it might be in your community, it might be on your campus. Somebody's doing something. It could be a literary magazine, or it could be a small press. You look to the nearest major city, right? Let's say it's Baltimore. Find out what's happening in Baltimore, right? You now have this wonderful tool that I didn't have when I was coming up. It's the internet, It's an amazing source, but you have to be able to use it wisely. So start by looking locally, because that's how poets get started. They get started right at home. No? Okay. Are there other questions? Any questions for my extraordinarily talented wife? Yes.
Have you made it to Puerto Rico yet? I know that's kind of like really personal.
No. You'd be amazed how many people ask me that question. Have I made it back to scatter the ashes? Because let's face it, I put it in a poem. And that left me wide open. Did you do it yet? How much should I even say? The answer is yes and no, because I was going to go back with the ashes in April of 2020. There was a conference I was going to in Arecibo, which is not far from Utuado. And of course, the conference was canceled with everything else and was never rescheduled. And then I got a chance to go back to Puerto Rico in August, but it was, as Puerto Ricans say, revolú. It was a great, big, friggin' mess. And it wasn't organized by local Puerto Ricans, it was organized by people in another stateside who were going to sort of import this program. And it was crazy, it was too much going on, and I decided it wasn't going to work. I knew it wasn't going to work for me to try to get the ashes back there and sort of find somebody with a car and go from Luquillo to Utuado and somehow get back again, and then what? You sort of throw them on the ground. So what I've now got a plan to do, and I will keep this promise to you, if no one else. I talked to my cousin. I have a cousin I'm very close to. Her name is Espada, and she feels about my father as if he raised her. And so we came up with a plan. It's going to be a family thing. So me and 2 of my cousins and our spouses are going to make a trip in the spring. We're going to fly into San Juan, spend the night there. Then we're going to make a trip way up into the mountains from Utuado, spend the night there, and then we're going to just scatter the ashes. And I'm going to have all the paperwork. That's the other thing, a lot of paperwork. It's one thing to scatter ashes and you don't tell anybody about it, but if you're flying with them, you better have all kinds of documents ready, okay? Because they're authoritarians, swine, right? They almost didn't let my wife board the plane coming here. Yes, this is the first time I'm telling this story in public because her driver's license says Laura Marie Espada and her pen name is Laura Marie Schmidt. And that's what it said on the boarding pass. And they got hysterical. They just about threw us out of the airport. And we had to get into a very intense, quiet little argument with them. And finally, she pulled out her book, said, look, this is my book. It's Filthy Labor. It's got my name on it. Let me on the plane. And there's the clerk, and no, you gotta go back home and get your marriage certificate. And fortunately, she was overruled by her supervisor, who was very impressed by the book. So that's my advice. If you're ever in any trouble, pull out your book. Poetry, yes, poetry saves the world. Would you like to come up here and share the stage? Because yes, she's got an amazing storehouse of knowledge. As I said, she's the best teacher I've ever known, and here she is now. So, you gotta go. Yes, question in the front row, please. Okay, so the question, I should repeat, what's that? Oh, my goodness, there are questions on Zoom. Okay, so I'll answer your question first, and then we will take what appear to be 3 questions on Zoom. Okay, so the question is about our marriage and the culture shock of our marriage. Could you say something about culture shock, please? What do you mean?
How you guys, we're all made in families and like, we so we and food out of here for, people from here. Like how us, the reaction of the institution when you marry, and
Okay.
vice versa.
Would you like to feel that?
I think the bigger problem that people have with our relationship is the age difference and not the cultural differences. So we're 23 years apart in age, and I think a lot of people look at this and they assume, oh, he's rich and she's a gold digger, right? Or other lurid things like I was groomed or something terrible, right? So I think that that's probably the bigger hurdle for us. I mean, culturally, I don't feel like we've had any issues with that, but I don't know, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say, just in addressing the question of culture shock, that I'm blessed to be with a partner who is very curious about my culture and my history, and so there's never been any conflict over that. If there's something going on and it has to do with me being Puerto Rican, she wants to be a part of that. Right? So you're talking about whether all the way from food to politics, to communities and activities in the community. And for example, we've both participated in readings for a community organization in Holyoke, Massachusetts, called the Care Center. The Care Center is a program, an educational program for adolescent mothers in Holyoke who drop out of the school system and are now getting a GED and other classes, including literature classes. And the students and the staff are predominantly Puerto Rican because that's Holyoke. Holyoke, by percentage, is more Puerto Ricans than any other city in the country. So we think, oh yeah, New York. No, Holyoke. So I was the one who made that contact. I've been going to it for more than 25 years. Then Lauren stepped into the same program and served the same community, and in fact was teaching at the time in Springfield, Massachusetts, again, a predominantly Puerto Rican student body. So she's been, she rolls up her sleeve and does the work, and that's all you can ask when it comes to something like that. All right, so I see 3 questions on the computer, and even I can read them. So we'll take these 3 questions, and I think we will, end the program after that. So the first question comes from Noah Otten. And Noah asks, is poetry something you create throughout your day or something you sit down to create? And that's another process question. Yes?
I'm so sorry to interrupt. I have a student here that has to catch the bus, which she really wanted her book signed. I apologize. Is there any way that you could just sign it?
Yeah, she wants her books, I just gotta catch the bus.
Okay, a student has to get her book signed. Yeah, get your book signed.
I apologize.
No, that's
No.
It's just she has to get the bus, so.
Yeah, this is hybrid. This is the world of hybrid. So, you know, this is the ultimate of multitasking, and I'm no good at it. But I will respond to Noah's question while Lauren is signing a book for a student who has to catch a bus. For those of you who may be wondering on Zoom what the hell is going on. Yeah, poetry is something you create during your day, and it's something you sit down and create. It's constantly going on in my mind. I'm constantly stringing together words and images in order to tell stories. But I accumulate enough words and images to do that over time. And then one day I sit down when I have the time in order to create that poem. And then it goes through many drafts before it becomes what you heard this afternoon. Okay, that book signing is still going on. I'll take a question from Tyreek Green. Tyreek Green wants to know, in each of the poems, how are you able to go into character while reading? Well, how do I go into character? The short answer is I am insane. The long answer is that I have a background in theater, both on the stage. I was with a community Shakespearean theater company for a while, but even before that, I was in radio theater, going back to my 20s when I was an undergrad in Madison, Wisconsin. So that enables me to go into character. I'm also a listener. I hear what people say, but I also hear the way they're saying it, and I have the ability to put that into the character that you hear. Tyreek Green has one more question coming through on Zoom. What effect do your poems have on social themes based on world events, including how does the poem affect your life through the years? Not sure I understand that question, but you really don't know what kind of effect your poem has when you put it out in the world. You can't weigh it, you can't measure it, you can't label it, you can't bottle it. You just put it out there into the world, and then it does whatever it's going to do. I had a professor at the University of Wisconsin, Madison. His name was Herbert Hill. And Professor Hill used to say, ideas have consequences. Ideas have consequences. Very simple, very elegant way of saying, you know, do what you have to do, write what you have to write, speak what you have to speak. It'll get into the world, and it'll become part of the atmosphere that we take in. Okay, is there anything else?
What prompted your drive or your interest in the social, I'll call it social purposes?
Anybody who is at all familiar with anything that I've written may detect that I was brought up in a very religious household. I'm no longer religious. I was raised Catholic, and I would say that most of the lessons that I was taught in my religious background, nothing really stuck except for the idea of service. And so I think that I've always been curious about the ways in which we treat our most vulnerable populations. Like I can't get over it, and I hope that there are future generations one day who judge us vehemently for that. So I would say that it stems from that, a sense of this is what I was put on the earth to do, is to serve others. My social work, my volunteerism began actually when I was playing piano and playing cards and reading to old people at an old people's home. And then from there, it went into what I was doing as a teacher as well, and I was serving at-risk kids after school. I was doing everything from tutoring them to teaching them how to make food and to playing games and to helping them do laundry, just like very basic needs sorts of things. And then I became an adult, and then I started serving at a homeless kitchen. I did that for about 5 years, a couple days a week. And then from there, I moved to where I was in Monmouth County, New Jersey, and that's where I started this creative writing program. My first book-length collection is actually about my volunteerism at the soup kitchen where I was living in Oregon. Filthy Labors is about, obviously, the transitional housing program for homeless women and the children who lived with them. And then from there, I was working and teaching in Patterson, and I was teaching a creative writing workshop, sort of talk therapy thing at a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center. So I've just sort of been all over the map with this kind of thing, but I think what they all have in common is that these are deeply impoverished and at-risk communities that are just, they're so invisible in our society, and I feel like we have to help each other because organizations or government, they're not going to be the ones to do it. There's a question in the How did we come to poetry as a passion in our lives?
Okay, yeah, how did we come to poetry as a passion in our lives? With me, it started in high school. I was a terrible student. I actually failed English in the 8th grade, and now I'm a professor of English, so I don't know what the hell. You know, so I first encountered it briefly in high school. I won't talk about that. I'll talk about the day I decided I was going to be a poet. I started writing, and then I stopped. I didn't see the point of it. And then one day I was at home, and a friend came to visit. He was a friend of my father's. His name was Luis Garden Acosta. There's a book about a poem about him in that book that you're holding. Luis Garden Acosta was a brilliant community organizer, and he was the co-founder of something called El Puente, which was and remains a multi-service community center in the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn, now in other areas of Brooklyn as well. And Luis was always organizing. And so he came up to me and he handed me a book. I was 20 years old. I was a dropout. I was well on my way to becoming a professional dishwasher. But Luis saw me differently. He handed me this book. And the book was called Latin American Revolutionary Poetry. It was edited by another New York Puerto Rican named Roberto Marquez, a professor at Hampshire and then later Mount Holyoke College. And I opened the book, and there was Pedro Pietri with his epic Puerto Rican obituary about Puerto Ricans in New York. And there was Ernesto Cardenal, a great poet priest of Nicaragua, writing about the dictatorship in that country and the revolution against it. And there was Nicolás Guillén, the great Afro-Cuban poet. And I realized all of a sudden that I belonged to a tradition. I had a history. I was no longer an amnesiac. I could contribute something to this chorus. And I started writing again at the age of 20, and I never stopped, 45 years later.
For me, it was, I discovered a poet named Paul Laurence Dunbar when I was 14 years old. The poem specifically that made me want to be a poet is called My Sort of Man. It's a long poem. I have it memorized. I love it so much, but you should Google it and look it up. It was in a book on my 9th grade English teacher's bookshelf that I stole, basically. Still have it to this day. And there was something about writing about real people and real struggle, human dignity that is relevant to all of his work, really, that stood out to me, because what I was learning in school were these sort of canon poems, right? Shakespeare, John Donne, like really stuff that was like way over our heads too at that age anyway, and it didn't feel like it connected at all. But there was something about the musicality of Paul Laurence Dunbar's work and the people that he was writing about that really connected in a way that still persists.
Okay, it appears to me there's one more question. I think we'll close with this question. And Malikis Laval is asking, for the dangerous passage, is that a fiction or real? I believe that refers to the poem Floaters and the dangerous passage across the Rio Grande. And that really happened. Not only did it really happen, but it continues happening. And as I mentioned when I introduced the poem, it's probably happening right now. And we have to do whatever we can so that it never happens again. So on that note, I believe we'll close the reading and the Q&A. Those of you who remain behind, bless your hearts. We will sign your books. We We will draw pictures in your books, whatever it is you want. I don't know if the bookstore is still out there, but if you don't have one, want to get one, maybe they will send one. So thank you all for being here. Thank you again, everyone who organized this. Thank you on Zoom, and thank you especially to my beloved Lauren Marie Schmidt, or is it Espada? And Espada is